welcome to another edition of the Front Page. My name is Andrew McKeever, the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. Good to be back with you again today. And really good to be back here with a special guest on our show today, Mr. Jeff Norman, who is a writer of several books and the editor and webmaster of Vermont Tiger, which is a website and blog site of political commentary on Vermont issues mainly, based in Dorset. And that's where Jeff lives with his wife, Marcia, who is the editor of Stratton Magazine. Jeff, welcome to the Front Page.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to have you with us. And your appearance is totally timely because we have an election season to talk about. And now that Peter Shumlin has been officially designated as the winner of the recount and is the nominee of the Democratic Party, I think we would both agree that we have a very interesting and exciting election on the gubernatorial level, at any rate, to look forward to. So I'm interested to hear, what do you think are some of the big issues that are going to sort of propel this race? Anything in particular that comes to mind?
Yeah, one, the economy, which you can parse in any number of ways. I mean, you can call it jobs, you can call it growth, you can call it whatever you want, but in Vermont, as in the rest of the country, people are not particularly worried right now about global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it. They're not especially, there's not a lot of noise on the social issue side of things, which is relatively untypical for Vermont. What people want to know about is, can I stay in my house? Will I keep my job? Can I get a job? One of the aspects of this that I find especially poignant is the fact that we're producing cohorts of college graduates who are coming out with nice degrees and not so nice levels of student debt and are unable to find jobs. You can walk around Manchester here and find a lot of kids waiting tables and doing that sort of thing who are unable to find work. They're living at home, and so both they and their parents have an incentive to worry about the economy.
Well, both candidates have repeatedly said already that they are coming at the economic picture from very different directions, that there's a very clear and well-defined choice between Peter Shumlin and Brian Dubie. What do you make of what both of them have said so far? Dubie has come out with a 10-point plan that he's been talking about at pretty much every opportunity. I know there's been some questions raised about whether or not the math adds up in that 10-point plan in terms of his proposals to cut or curb or hold to a 2% increase state spending. Let me ask you, do you think his plan adds up at this point? And then we can talk a little bit about what Peter Shumlin is proposing too.
Well, you know, in the military they have a phrase about all operational plans are sound until you have first contact with the enemy. I've read Lieutenant Governor Dubie's plan. It's a serious document. I mean, this is not blue sky stuff. They've done the numbers. They've studied the problems. They have done projections. And as with all of those things, you say, yeah, well, that's very nice. I hope it works. It would be nice if it did. Its premise, though, is that something that I think is fundamentally sound, and that is that we have to not cut spending, which is what he will be accused of, but to reduce the growth in spending at the state level. Let revenues increase, which we hope they will, and by doing so close what's a very large deficit over the next 2 years in the absence of what's called around Montpelier era money, which is the American Something in Recovery Act.
Recovery Act, right. Better known as stimulus
Better known
money.
as the stimulus, which
Right.
was free money for states for a couple of years, and that's drying up. And so they're going to have to find ways to close that gap. So I think that there are going to be a lot of shots taken at Dubie's plan, some legitimate, some merely partisan. I put personally less credence in a plan, in the particulars of it, than I do in the general approach, and I like his general approach.
And what about Shumlin's? Do you, I mean, my take on Peter Shumlin is that he comes more out of the mold of the classic sort of big government type of guy who's sort of probably not going to be quite as eager to see more cutbacks, even though the state is facing a $100 million, $110 million budget deficit next year. But is there anything to suggest in what we've heard from Mr. Shumlin so far that we're going to be flexible?
Peter Shumlin is a very adroit politician, and he's not going to do anything to cut his own throat. He's not going to do anything to antagonize his own voters, which puts him in a difficult spot because his voters are the voters who want, they don't want to see growth in spending restrained. They want state spending to increase, if not at current levels, then higher than current levels. So he's in a little bit of a box there. Right now, all I've seen in terms of very concrete proposals coming out of his campaign are a proposal to save on incarceration by doing supervised release of nonviolent, low-level criminals. Personally, I don't think that's such a bad idea. It's possible to spend as much keeping somebody locked up for a pot bust for a couple of years as it is to send them to Harvard. I don't know which person comes out better off, but so that proposal may or may not fly. The other thing I'm hearing from Mr. Shumlin, or in my reading of it, is he's continuing to go around talking about single-payer health care as some sort of solution. Well, in the second place, it's not doable because of the feds won't allow you to do it until 2017.
Right, that's part of the new healthcare reform bill.
Whole new big bill that was passed last year. And in the first place, we see how popular healthcare reform was at the national level, and to promise that we're going to save money by having the government take over healthcare, this is the same government that does your car registration, and the same at the federal level delivers the mail. And would you rather have your mail delivered by FedEx or the U.S. Post Office?
Well, I guess it'll certainly be, I think, an interesting campaign. Both personalities actually are going to be, I think, interesting to watch as we go forward from here to November. Now, I know from reading your blog site, Vermont Tiger, fairly regularly, that one of the big issues that seems to be a recurring theme among some of your contributors and also the folks who post on the blog site is this whole question of property taxes and income sensitivity. Education spending in general is another theme that seems to be frequently commented upon. Where do you see that playing out this year in terms of the dialogue between Shumlin and Doobie? Is that going to be a big factor, do you think, or is that one of these issues that's so complicated it's hard for the average voter to kind of factor that in?
Well, it's hard for the above-average voter to understand the Vermont education funding system. I think you might need a PhD in something. Maybe the criteria hasn't even been established yet for what you need to be able to do to understand that. Here's the way I think about that. Mr. Shumlin is the Democratic candidate for governor. He is not going to be able to go out there and say, I want to reduce school spending, because reducing school spending means, in Vermont, cutting staffing, which, as we have pointed out over and over and over again on our website, and what I think are some of the best, most heavily, deeply researched studies done anywhere in this state by Mr. Hugh Kemper, we've demonstrated that we have the highest staffing ratio in the land, and that it's possible to save almost $100 million by merely going down to tied for first or something to that effect. We don't have to work really hard. We don't have to leave a lot of blood on the floor to realize huge savings, but it does mean fewer teachers, fewer administrators, fewer, supplementary personnel, which is a hard pill for any Democratic office holder in this state to swallow. So if you're looking for savings in education, I think you're going to have a tough time finding them on the Democratic side. Now, education, as we all know, is funded not entirely but largely out of property taxes. Property taxes in this state are, like many things, a convoluted mess. It is possible for one to live in an $800,000 house and pay no property taxes, while the neighbor living in the $300,000 house pays essentially his full share and the share of that $800,000 properties as well. It's known as income sensitivity. It is a well-meaning, like so many programs, it is well-meaning in its origins, and it has become perverse in its execution and its expansion. We now, as I said, we have people living in million-dollar homes who pay no property taxes or can, and it's done in the name of fairness. Essentially, it started out as a way of, as property values increased, of somebody who was a low-income rural Vermonter, lived in his home for 200 years. I've been in the family for 200 years.
Generations. Right.
Didn't want to get the house sold out from under him. We're all for that.
Yeah.
We're all for that. For the person who's, living off principal in a huge investment portfolio and has a big house, we're not so much in favor of that. But all these programs build up constituencies, and there's a tough constituency behind income sensitivity. That's going to be hard to reform. But it strikes me that it's unfair, and it works to the advantage of, well, here, I'll give you an example. If you are a private sector drone and you've faithfully put money into your 401k or your IRA or whatever over 30 years, and you've built yourself a little nest egg, and you are now ready to retire, and you're in your home, and your income is over the income sensitivity threshold through the interest and dividend returns on your portfolio. Well, those interest and dividend numbers are doubled for purposes of income sensitivity for you. If, on the other hand, you and your spouse were school teachers or government employees of some sort over all of these years, and you're being paid an equal amount in pension income, that's not double counted. So this is, there's no fairness there that I can see. But it's going to be one of those things that's very hard to change. We build these special treatments for special interests, and then the special interest clings to them, until you can see the fingernail marks.
Well, I know one of the problems with the income sensitivity thing is the sheer cost of it. I mean, it's not a free lunch, and I know one of the points of discussion has been how high to raise it, or nowadays to lower it. I mean, we were up to around, I think, $90,000 to $100,000,
Yeah,
and
somewhere in
that was
that
the
range.
range. You could be making that much, and you would have a portion of your property taxes protected. I guess the idea is to ratchet that down somewhat, but I'm not sure if I've heard any real concrete proposals to say, let's take this down to 80 or 70 or...
Well, you could start with the median income, which is in the 60,000 range or something, high 50s, I think. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I'd have to get my
I don't know many
colleague,
people who
Art
are-
Wolf.
I don't know many people in Vermont making $50,000.
No, it's not
I don't know where this number comes from.
but it's the median.
Yeah.
And we especially don't see that much in southern Vermont. So you could start there. I mean, there's this the number is going to be arbitrary wherever you pick it, but it certainly seems like the median income is a place you can start.
one of the things that's already been kind of talked a little bit about in the governor's campaign is this whole business of taxes being too high in Vermont, and what we were just talking about there fits into that. But I mean, I know Lieutenant Governor Doobie has talked about how income taxes are a disincentive for businesses to relocate in Vermont or to start in Vermont, and that's something he feels is important to address. There have been some studies that have come out and said, well, wait a minute, the only people who are paying more in income taxes in Vermont than, let's say, in Massachusetts or New York are people who are at the very top end of the income spectrum, who are making $1 million or more and can afford it. What do you make of that? I mean, because one of the arguments that's been advanced on Vermont Tiger, I've read several times, is that, well, yeah, but the flip side of a progressive tax structure is that you have a very small number of people at the very top paying the lion's share of the taxes, and it doesn't take too many of them to move out of state before all of a sudden you've got a problem. I mean, do you see that really beginning to happen as a case where a lot of the top 1% wage earners in Vermont are migrating to Florida or someplace else? Or is that still kind of a wait-and-see situation?
Well, the short answer is yes, we see it. I mean, Rich Tarrant, who's now a Florida resident.
Right.
The question about taxes and incentives is, to me, very simply answered. If you don't believe that taxes influence behavior, take a little drive over to the Connecticut River Valley and check out the empty parking lot in Brattleboro where a Home Depot used to be. Then drive across the river to Keene and take a look at the parking lot where the Home Depot now is and count the Vermont license plates. We're not, taxes are not the only thing that influence economic behavior, but they are certainly a component. And people look at taxes before they make investment decisions, before they make purchasing decisions, before they make hiring decisions. It would be to Vermont's advantage to flatten the tax rate somewhat and broaden it somewhat. I mean, economists don't agree on everything, but one thing they generally do agree on is that the best tax structure is one that's broad in reach and low in acquisition.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see. I know you can parse numbers all kinds of different ways, and but clearly I think this whole question of income tax and property tax is going to be clearly it's been a major problem and a point of discussion for years, and shows no signs of not being one going forward.
Well, like I said at the beginning, I mean, what people are interested in this election is the economy and their own economic survival. In Vermont, that means somehow trying to get a private sector economy back or to a position of some growth, if not robust growth. We have not had any real private sector growth in years and years. I think one of the things you have to look at is taxes. Taxes, regulation, the kinds of things that inhibit or discourage economic growth.
We have a few minutes left, Jeff, and before we run out of time, I did want to talk a little bit about your website and your blog site and kind of the different styles of journalism, I guess, that are represented right here between sort of an online publication like yours and sort of the old world offline print media that is the world I still kind of mainly live in, although we over at the Journal have also dabbled in online work as well. Tell me a little bit about the blog site and how it got started. You've been around for now, what, 4 or 5 years? Is that
It'll be 4 years in January.
Okay.
Well, we have ambitions. I mean, we'd like to become more of an aggressive, reporters in the field type operation. We don't have any resources for that at this point. So we depend on people like you.
Oh. We
We link to your stories and then we comment them. And that's not exclusive.
You're part of the problem.
Yeah, I to which I plead guilty. Somehow, and I have no deeper insight into this than anyone else, but somehow in the next few years, there's going to have to be a synergistic shakeout of this relationship between people online who can just access the work product of people who, you know, are putting out a newspaper. We have done a certain amount of original reporting and work, and it's some of the best, most interesting stuff. I mean, most satisfying stuff that we've done. We haven't done nearly as much as I'd like to. When I started this thing 4 years ago, I had a sort of a lukewarm feeling about the press and media in Vermont. My opinion of the press and the media in Vermont has ratcheted up quite a bit. I'm very impressed with some of the work that gets done, a lot of the work that gets done in this state, and gets done on very thin resources. We basically look at the news however we can get it, from our readers, from the people who are regulars, but we also go to your website, the Free Press website, VPR's website. We take their work product and we direct our readers to it, and then we generally comment on it, critique it, do whatever we do. We couldn't do that if they weren't there, if you weren't there. But more and more people are neglecting to buy the Rutland Herald or the Manchester Journal because they can go get it for free. Free is not a very good business model.
Well, ultimately, everything costs something. I know it costs us something to put the website up, and like as you say, anyone can go there. I mean, of course, the paper itself, in our case, is also free, but you know, there is a cost factor associated with it. But what I love about the online world is that you can have such immediate editing capability, or you can amend things. You can put something up right away as it's happening. You don't have to kind of, well, in our case, wait a week, which sometimes seems like forever. But you can go in and you can also then elicit the sort of dynamic two-way conversation with people commenting on it in real time almost.
Yeah, there's so much that's. I mean, I started out in print 35 years ago, so I'm a lot more of a print guy than a digital guy. I'm still learning about all this stuff, but there's so many things that are just wonderful for somebody who cares about media and the news. I mean, what you just mentioned, the real-time capability, and one of the things I find just wonderful about it is, I don't know if you still have to lay, how you lay papers out anymore, but I mean, it used to be when I was working in print, somebody would come to you and say, hey, that story's 900 words and I needed it to be 800, so you go back to your copy and start cutting widows and looking for this and that sort of thing.
Right.
The web is as shallow or as deep as you need it to be. It actually requires a little more discipline than some writers are willing to give it. I mean, it's harder to write short than it is to write long. But stories find their own length, their own sort of shape in the web, and I find that really satisfying and agreeable. I find the instant feedback from readers agreeable. I mean, one of the things that drives people crazy about the press, the media, is something that's factually inaccurate or hideously partisan can creep into your copy, and it'll be a week before anything gets done. In your case, a week, or at least a day or two before anything gets done in print, and then it gets done in agate type down at the bottom somewhere. We said and so that man, if I put up something that's mistaken, I hear about it within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I can answer it in 30 minutes, and people are less antagonized if you address something immediately and say, you're right, we're wrong, we correct it, or no, you're wrong, and here's our sourcing.
Well, the interesting thing going forward, I think, is going to be to what extent, we were talking about this earlier, to what extent the free model becomes no longer affordable for a lot of those major media outlets that I think we're beginning to see some of the first stirrings that, you know, some of the folks who run these news operations are saying at some point this has to start paying for itself. And I think going forward that will be interesting to see how much of it remains kind of just open and accessible like it is now, and versus.
Well, it's going to be fascinating. I mean, I know that there's a big percentage of people in this country who are ignorant of everything that's not about, you know, American Idol or something, but there is still a huge appetite for news, and somehow finding a way to monetize that appetite is the big challenge.
Right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, Jeff, but thanks so much for being with us today, and thank all of you folks for watching and listening to The Front Page. My name is Andrew McKeever, and here with my guest Jeff Norman, the editor and publisher, I guess we could call you, of Vermont Tiger. You can find it on www.vermonttiger.com.
Yep.
And always an interesting read. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again next time.